Well, alrighty then. I do love those intro videos. Hey, welcome once again, everyone. James Waddell to Cognitively CRE. I am very, very excited about today's show. Today, we are going to be talking about the Verum Remote Work Index. And to help me talk about that, we have Vic Bangia. Vic, how you doing, buddy? And would you mind doing a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. I like that intro music. It puts you in a good mood. It's really nice.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So hi, everybody. My name is Vic Bangia. I am the CEO of Verum Consulting. We're a corporate real estate and facilities management, strategy and operations and outsourcing advisory group based in Minnesota. I have spent the last 30 years in corporate real estate and facilities management and very keenly interested on the future of work and workplace. And one of the things that I did probably within the last 6 months is really focus my efforts on remote work and hybrid work and how that might impact the company's environmental, social responsibility and governance scores. So I came up with the idea for the Verum Remote Work Index, and we'll talk a little bit about more about what that is and how that works. And then also in partnership with Cognitive, created the platform with which we can bring that to market. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But thank you, James, for having me as part of the show today.
Super awesome. Thanks for being here, truly. Hey, let me start by giving a little bit of insight into how, from a cognitive perspective, we came together with you guys. So we've been very focused on developing these new innovations called solutions for humans being, right? So that's our tagline, solutions for humans being. So what does that mean, right? It means our solutions help optimize where we live, learn, recover, work, and play from an environmentally conscious perspective and from a socially responsible perspective. So bringing innovations to market, typically around the built environment or items that pertain to the built environment, like energy savings, really attract us in terms of our innovative capability in bringing those to market. So one of the core components that is an overlay for us is blockchain. And that's going to be a key component for the VRWI, Verum Remote Work Index, that we're going to talk about here in just a second. And when we think about environmentally conscious and socially responsible, what better way to package that than in the context of ESG, right? So there's two big core dimensions to that, helping the world really truly define what a remote distributed workforce, the impact it's having from an environmental, social, and governance perspective. And really the now on-demand workforce that sort of falls into that. And I think that's more of where we're headed into the future. What kind of impact does that have from an environmental and socially responsible perspective? And then that second dimension, which is incredibly important for us, is surfacing solutions that will help increase the impact that programs around ESG are having, not just reporting on where you are today, but helping achieve sustainable improvements globally for everybody in a socially responsible way. So let me talk a little bit about Web 3.0, which is really blockchain and crypto. That's when we say Web 3.0, that's really what we're talking about. It allows the ability to afford some transparency on what's happening in the world as it relates to reporting, as it relates to data, as it relates to transactions. From our perspective, Web 3.0 allows us, particularly in an ESG environment, to share the report with everyone. It can be validated as the report that hasn't been modified in any way. But there's also, from an ESG reporting perspective, there's the data that's used, the raw data that's used to generate your insights for your ESG reporting that we're making available from Web 3.0 transparency perspective as well. This is something that we had been working on in a testing phase and sort of a Skunks Works lab for quite some time. When we ran across the Verum Remote Work Index, we thought, wow, what an amazing concept to accelerate what we're doing from a Web 3.0 perspective, from a reporting perspective, and bring in these new frameworks around Verum Remote Work Index. So, with that, I think, Vic, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your thoughts and what has drawn you to VRWI.
Yeah, thanks, James. So, I always thought there should be, and there is, intuitively we know this, a correlation between real estate and facilities, an employee's work, their remote work or hybrid work capability, and their job satisfaction. And companies that are implementing a remote or hybrid work place program are doing so without really knowing how they're going to measure the outcome of that. So there was this gap there that I felt was it was a felt need from me that something needed to be done to sort of close that gap. And so I designed the Verum Remote Work Index to be a process that's designed to sort of deconstruct a company's ESG scoring methodology to see what measurements are being tracked today, probably not very many related to remote and hybrid work, but if any of those can be implemented and then enhanced. So today, that whole deconstruction will sort of be a bespoke process. And in fact, we're looking for a couple corporate end users to do a pilot program with us so that we can do the proof of concept and actually help them define what remote capability and remote work is doing for their company. But as we start to see this move to more of a standard definition in the industry, we want to be at the forefront of creating that standard as it relates to corporate real estate and facilities management impact of remote work. Despite the lack of standards, I think we're going to work with corporate real estate facilities departments to support their company's corporate social responsibility reporting and their ESG program by helping to evaluate their existing programs, their sustainability programs, their reporting as it exists today, and then develop programs for other areas as well. So outside of the Remote Work Index, there are social responsibility and governance programs such as using technology to support these initiatives and a company's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, which could also be an index and a score, a company's procurement methodology and how they work with their outside vendors, which could be a score as it relates to governance. So all of these things kind of go into what I'm creating, which is just a sliver related to remote work. There can be a remote work index that has to do with diversity, a diversity work index. There could be a procurement or supply chain work index, and all these things can be components of the larger picture. But I think that what needs to happen more than anything else is companies need to be able to measure the impact that their remote work and their hybrid work is having on the company, and also be able to scenario plan if they go more remote or go less remote, what that does to their company's carbon footprint and what it does to employee satisfaction. Simple as that, and complicated as that.
It really is complicated when you start even having a conversation around ESG and even what it is, right? There's some common frameworks that are out there, and we don't want to get too deep into those frameworks, but really, as we understand it from our research perspective, that there's components that are taken from these frameworks that are customized, and they sort of sometimes fit into what the corporation's trying to do with their own definitions and improvements around ESG. Fascinating, right? Just fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And right now, ESG is kind of a perception, right? It's not necessarily a standard because there are governing bodies, but they're not mature enough to actually have defined for the industry, here is what ideal looks like. Here is what measurement looks like. So companies are sort of left to themselves to say, look, we're working on something, and they're able to report progress, but they're not able to report progress to a standard. And so, but I think in the future, ESG is going to be important for a number of reasons. One, and the two I think that are most important to me. One is how a company reports its ESG scores to the financial markets for investment purposes, for regulatory reasons. And then the second one, and the more important one to me, is employees will look at a company's ESG score to say, do I really want to work for this company? Because a company that has the right level of awareness of how they are impacting the the ecology of the world and reducing their carbon footprint is going to be very important for employees as they look to that company as a potential employer. And so the criteria right now is sort of all over the place, but I think we're starting to see it get more and more defined. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, to that end, I think employers are looking at ways to attract talent, and that's really hard to do in a work from anywhere environment, right? It's really hard to get a handle and a grasp on what's occurring from a socially responsibility perspective when you're not grouped together in a centralized environment. And that's one of the other things that really attracted us to the Verum Remote Work Index.
Yeah, and it has to be a collaborative process with HR, with real estate and facilities, and with the company's overall sustainability groups, because ultimately what you want to give employees the ownership and control of their job, right? Mm-hmm. There's a certain challenge there, right? Companies don't necessarily want to give their employees carte blanche on defining their own job's remote capability. But if you work with your company and your employer is amenable to this, they can say, look, let's figure out the right amount of flexibility that goes into this job. And if you can create more flexibility, great. As long as you're doing this within an outcomes-based performance management program, that works. If you don't, well, then you're going to have everybody say, hey, guess what? I'm 100% remote and nobody's watching me and nobody's minding the store and I'm doing what I want. If it's an outcomes-based performance management program and your employer agrees that your job is 50%, but if you can make it 60%, great. If you do, then HR will write that into the job description that this job can be up to 60% remote. If you take that score across the entire enterprise and say, okay, our overall organization is 42% remote, and you say, hey, let's lever this up. Let's say we got everybody to work so that we are at a 50% remote capability. What did that do to our carbon footprint reduction? What did that do to our overall ESG score? That's the beauty of doing this right. You'll be able to make inroads into giving employees choice and flexibility, which ultimately is what's going to keep people employed and happy with the organization.
Choice and flexibility, another key that really drew us together, that let us know that we were a perfect fit together. When we think about our blockchain innovations and what we really focus on, I mentioned briefly, it was around democratization of data and being able to share that easily. The second thing that the blockchain enables us to do is to reward individual behavior towards large corporate goals, right? And not to get too really deep into that, but ultimately blockchain has crypto associated with it. So there's an opportunity now to have a program defined to help improve or move forward some ESG initiatives. And now we have the ability to surface the data down to an individual level and to help reward and incentivize those individuals for participating in those programs.
Yeah. So David, this comes with two caveats, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please go ahead. No.
This comes with two caveats, right? If you by working remotely are reducing your company's carbon footprint, you may also, by working remotely, be increasing your own carbon footprint, right? So there needs to be some behavior modification with you working from home at home to continue to reduce the overall carbon footprint. And that's where the incentivization comes in, because if you can reward employees to think eco-friendly, to think about sustainability, to think about reducing their carbon footprint when they're away from the office, you're not only turning them into better employees and better corporate citizens, you're actually making them better humans, right? Because they're going to look to the world as something that they need to preserve, and they're going to get rewarded for it based on the CWX and other things that I'm sure you want to talk about as a reward mechanism, because I think that's important.
100%. I wanted to acknowledge David's comment. So David, thank you, one, for letting us know that there's someone out there watching. So thank you. Two, absolutely agree with your comment. Employees, I believe, absolutely will be watching ESG scores as part of their selection process for where they want to spend their time, invest their time. It's not just about earning the biggest paycheck. It's not just about being self-fulfilled. At least in what I'm seeing in this next generation of worker coming up, it's about what's best for all in this sort of shared economy, right?
I would say, interesting, you could say, as an employer, you could say, hey, we're focused on indoor air quality, thermal comfort, acoustics, and lighting. And if you come work for us, you're actually going to be healthier, and you're going to sleep better, and you're going to have a much more healthy life working for our company and live and working in our buildings as opposed to somewhere else. So that can be a very interesting competitive advantage when it comes to recruiting.
Let me share a note from Amira. Thank you. Hopefully I've pronounced that right. And thank you for the support. We also think the blockchain is the way of the future. It supports shared economy, it supports shared work. It's an excellent way of decentralizing and taking away all the governance that you may not want on a platform that's available today, like some of the social media platforms. And it's a way for you to control your contribution and what you want to share. So we definitely think it's the next phase of where we're going into the future. Vic, let's take a little bit more of a look behind the scenes at what the Verum Remote Work Index delivers, what it actually is.
Sure. Well, several components that start to become periphery to the core of Remote Work Index, but I think these are all important, right? You have the workforce score, which measures the job, the employee's effectiveness in the job, the level of job satisfaction, everything related to the Remote Work Index that I'm working on. But then there's other aspects of the ESG model, which includes safety, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, like I mentioned, procurement and supply chain, and the way vendors are managed, and how you qualify or pre-qualify those vendors to work for your company based on their own level of ESG compatibility and sustainability. And then there's an overall environmental score, which has to do with energy management and all sorts of other things. So the purpose of this slide is to really show, and maybe it would have been better in a wheel with spokes, to show that the Remote Work Index is really just one spoke in a many-spoked wheel that all feeds into ESG. And I think that, I'm not trying to be all of these things. I'm trying to focus my efforts on just the remote work, because, the way you execute on a remote work index ties back into what the workspace looks like in the office. It ties back to what the workspace could look like at home, and some of the things that you could provide your employees to work better at home. And it also has a sort of a symbiotic relationship between employee and employer. All these other things, the safety scores, the procurement scores, are all operational. And so I would encourage anybody who has a thought about creating that tie-in to ESG ought to really think about becoming part of an R&D community that is all looking to pursue this type of goal to really make the ESG scores in the future meaningful and more, as we talked about, become more of a standard.
100%, 100%. I'm going to show Amir's comment here again. Performance with purpose. That's
like that.
Very well said. If I would have thought of that would have been the tagline, as opposed to solutions for humans being. Excellent work. Hey, let me take a step now and give some insight into some of the characteristics that we wanted our software platform to have. Right. Let me make this a little bit bigger here. There we go. So one of the things that was important to us, team alignment and buy-in, we wanted the platform that we're using to generate the Verum Remote Work Index to also be a platform to allow for communication and collaboration, and to ensure that we have the ability to support agreement and buy-in from the team who's pulling this report together. So from that perspective, the platform doesn't just collect data. It doesn't just do some heuristics and math, and doesn't just generate a report that's on the blockchain. It allows you to invite participants who are maybe outside the company or maybe even inside the company to generate the data that they own, and to have a say into how that data is analyzed and placed into the report. We think that's incredibly important. So that's why it's first.
And this dovetails into a little bit of my consultative approach too, because I use a discovery process to achieve that team buy-in and alignment. Because without it, you really won't get very far. You'll have to have least an agreement internally on what it is that you're going to measure and what's important to the company. And if you've got competing internal, agendas, it's going to be much tougher.
Yeah, that dovetails excellent into that next point around categorizing the VRWI, Verum Remote Work Index. There's most assuredly some level of ESG reporting going on for companies in the Fortune 5000. The question becomes, to what extent have they had the ability to include CRE and FM, and how can we remove those barriers? And then the next conversation becomes, how can we then include your remote decentralized impacts into that reporting mechanism? So there's a much larger picture that we do have a fit into, which is the actual overall reporting of the ESG mechanism. But we want to stay very focused in our pilot programs and with our launch. And when we talk about Verum Remote Work Index, it is all about the impact of the decentralized worker and its impact on your ESG score.
Might I also mention here that we are going to do 2 pilot programs with corporate real estate end user organizations pro bono. We're actually doing this to develop that proof of concept, but working with forward-thinking companies that want to do this and have the bandwidth to do it. I think that's a little bit of a challenge, but we'll do it 2 times so that we get a good sample size, I guess, if you will, a larger client and kind of a mid-size or mid-cap client that gives us, good perspective on how this works and, what level of effort is required internally, so that when we take it to market, we're very clear on what the impact is going to be from a resourcing standpoint to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anybody out there, if you're interested in making an application or having a discussion about a proof of concept at your work, reach out to Vic or I. We'd love to have that conversation with you. We're going to mention that a little earlier too, but I just wanted to toss that in. But let me sum up these next 4 pieces in one conversation. Our Verum Remote Work Index that we're building is going to be a framework very similar to many of the standardized ESG frameworks that you see out there in the world today. So it has its materiality. It has the dimensions that are the questions and the necessary answers and the achievable data sets that you draw your inferences from, and it has a standardized report. We're going to hone that in these POC, proof of concept engagements, which is why we're doing it for free. We're then going to develop a true VRWI framework that can be used in ESG software beyond just the software even that Cognitive has. Now, we would like for you to buy it through the Cognitive software. That would be wonderful. But the framework, our intent is that framework be something that's globalized and that can be used in any platform or in any process for which you might need to be incorporating your remote workers' impact in. Now, again, not to get too deep because we're trying to stay high level and give you an overview of what VRWI is. But what always comes up is everybody's worried about carbon. Everybody doesn't quite know how to handle the carbon impact of a remote worker. So usually they put that into scope 3, which is sort of everything else. And in reality, where we think it should be is in scope 2, because you can measure the impact of a compute device that has been issued to a worker. Regardless of where they're using that compute device, you can pull the data from that device on how much power that it's using. So that becomes a very important categorization that tends to get missed today. And it has a significant impact on your carbon footprint when you just put it in scope 3 and not really consider its impact in scope 2. So these are some of the things that we're thinking through in terms of the framework that we're pulling together.
Excellent.
We're pretty much right on time. Usually about 30 minutes is what we try to keep this to, because we know everybody's super busy and we want to be able to answer questions or comments at the end. But let's talk about how to get involved. There's a couple of ways that we've already mentioned. Becoming a proof of concept co-creation partner is, I think, an incredible opportunity. It allows us to bring all the research that we've currently done into your workplace. It allows you to have some input into that after learning what it is, and then to taking a part of co-creating this now, what will eventually become a global standard for measuring impact of ESG on the remote work environment. Anything to add there, Vic, before I hit the next slide?
Nope. Let me know if you're
Excellent.
interested. We're
Awesome.
eager to get started with some companies that are, like I said, forward thinking and want to see this become a reality.
If you have any questions or comments, as others have done, you can post them in the comment section on LinkedIn. If you're on YouTube, you can do the same thing. Those will be there in the recording as well, so I have an opportunity to follow up as long as they're not overwhelmed with them. It's probably best if you're watching this recorded session that you simply reach out through LinkedIn to Vic or I, and we can have a great conversation about that. I'm not going to speak much about this, but there is something out there called cognitive CWX. It's a way that allows us to bind our ecosystem, our community partners together. When you think about the wheel of destiny that we brought up, there's so many solutions that fit into that in reality all have an impact on a centralized theme. And that truly is the impact in the health and the well-being. So in all of the things that are so important to us from a global culture today. Is what we pull into our ecosystem. And the CWX is a token and a blockchain project that allows us to do that. So if you're interested in that very, very nebulous description of CWX, please reach out to me and I can give you some more information on that. But what I really want to stay focused on right now is this Verum Remote Work Index. Super excited by it. 100% of the conversations that we're having to sustainability leaders, to HR leaders in the organization. They know it's an issue. It was completely beyond the conversation as to how to address it. Now that there's an opportunity to talk about how to address it, it becomes a very real, very exciting conversation for individuals. So I'd like to talk to you about that if you're watching this in live or recorded session. And with that, Vic, just any closing thoughts or the one thing you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, well, a couple things. I mean, I can certainly imagine the future where, a remote work index, which is the remote capability of every job that is available for every company that's out there, will have an index score. So you can basically look at a job description online and say, hey, this is great. This job has a 60% remote capability, or this job has a 40%. You see that today sometimes where sometimes they say, hey, this job requires 25% travel or 50% travel. In the future, you'll see a number thrown out there. But if it's a certified number, in other words, if it's part of the remote work index, you'll have, it'll have greater credibility that it's not just a number that's thrown out there sort of pie in the sky, but that there's been some study and some research done on it. And it's part of that whole blockchain that goes into the company's ESG reporting. So it's a bona fide number, if you will. And if you own that job, then you can actually change it for that company and your role in that company. So I just think it gives a lot of empowerment back to the employees, and it looks like it'll be a great thing for the future.
Yeah, I think I'd like to close by talking about this comment from Gary. Gary, thank you for the comment. So I'll just read it. Is VRW focused on remote workforce only, or does it include the portion of workforce considered non-remote in ESG impacts?
It considers both, because the remote work index, if it's a very low number, it's talking about employees that are in the office predominantly for their role. So it is measuring their carbon footprint as well. And when we talked about the incentives earlier, if you're in the office 90% of the time, or 80% of the time, if you're only home 1 day a week, you can still measure your reduction in carbon footprint happening in the office when you're there and at home when you're not. So it is for both. Yeah,
the thought that came to my mind in hearing your comments, Vic, is how do we define remote? Is it someone that's partly in the office, partly working from home? Is it someone that's always not in the office? And that's some of the language and the issues that we're having today in trying to define this. But yeah.
To me, the definition of remote is away from the office. So if a remote could be at a third place, or it could be working from home, it's not necessarily that. It all goes into the sort of hybrid model. What part of hybrid is remote? What part of hybrid means you're in the office? What part of hybrid means you're in a hotel, or at an airport? Or a WeWork. It can be a number of things.
Awesome. And strangely enough, we do have a way to measure where we get our best work done from a team's perspective. So let's have another conversation about that. Thank you, everyone. We're a little bit over our 30-minute time period. I'm going to leave you with a short promotional video. Again, thank you very, very much for your time.